Welcome to History 601, Introduction to Public History, Week 1. First of all, I want to provide you with some of my contact information. You can always reach me at my email address, tenkottep@nku.edu, or on my cell phone. And the number is listed there. Please try to call between 9 and 5. If I'm not available, leave a message, or if you call before or after that time, please leave a message. We're going to talk a little bit about some syllabus kind of features. I'm going to let you read that over yourself. You can download that from the website. But let's talk a little bit about the assessment. We have an icebreaker assignment, which is just introducing yourself to your fellow classmates so that we begin to get to know one another a little better. Some topical discussion boards, 15 of those at 50 points each, a book review at 100 points, and a final reflective essay at 50 points. That add up to 920 points. But if you look at the table below, and a 100% in this class is 900. So when I do my calculations at the end of the semester, I base everything on how many points you have out of 900. And you might have some questions, maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks into the class, Blackboard, grade book says you're getting an A- or something, and you say, hey, that's wrong, I'm getting an A because I have such and such number of points and I'm looking at the graph here. Don't worry about it, or if you have some questions, get a hold of me and I'd be happy to answer them. Blackboard grade book is not able to figure out my system because of the 20 points of built-in extra credit. So it's constantly getting things wrong. So I use my own calculations at the end of the semester. So what you again need to do is keep track of your points if you're interested in knowing what your grade is in a particular point, and then checking them against this nice little handy chart here. Now, discussion boards. What we're going to be looking at in this class is we're going to be doing a lot of reading, which is typical, by the way, of graduate school. We try to give you a lot of reading. Obviously, you'll learn that you can't read each and every word in all of your classes, otherwise you could possibly go insane. But you can read very quickly, glance, speed read, kind of spot check some things, look at topical sentences, etc., and figure out a way to get all of the work done. Now, when we're doing this, part of the exercise is to get you to read a lot so that you learn how to pick out the best points and how to analyze those points, because you'll be doing this throughout your public history career. Public history is largely about being able to take lots and lots of information, or in the case of a museum, lots and lots of artifacts, and be able to pick out the best things that are going to relate to the topic and to your audience. And we're always keeping in mind audience, 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 audience. Just like in real estate, location, 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 they say, are the 3 most important rules. In public history, because we're dealing with the public, the 3 most important rules are audience, audience, audience. And if we were going to use kind of a verb for that, we'd say relate, relate, relate. Relate the topic to the audience, relate the topic to the audience, relate to your audience, etc. So we're going to ask some questions, some critical thinking, analytical questions about our assignments. Who wrote the selection? Who is the author? What do we know about them? What we can find out about them? And again, who is the audience for this reading, this selection? Is it a general audience? Is it a more specialized audience? Is it for archivists? Is it for museum directors? Is it just for anyone? When was the selection written? And that's important because have things happened since then that are more modern best practices? Are these some standard classical best practices that they might be describing, which, have never really gone out of style? Were the people writing, were they typical of their time, behind their times, ahead of their times? That's important to consider. And then, of course, what does the the selection state? Are they taking an issue and looking at it pro and con? Are they for one side and against perhaps another side? Are they stating anything new or innovative? Is it more of a general overview, or is it, something that is more deep? I mean, some of the articles I'm going to have you are just to have you read a general overview, and some of them are very, very specific, and you can't get too bogged down, especially the ones about electronic data, unless, of course, you have a degree and informatics or computers? Does it offer sufficient examples, references, etc., to back up what the selection states? And then oftentimes we often forget to ask the question, what not? That's just as important. What does the selection, what does the author not state? And why does he or she not state that? Can you figure it out? Is there a reason maybe why they don't state that? Would stating something go against their argument? Would it kind of disprove their argument? Or is it just, maybe an accidental omission? Maybe it hasn't been invented yet or even talked about as a best practice yet? And then perhaps one of the most important questions is, what then? Why is this selection important? Most of your professors, I think, are going to give a lot of thought to the development of their classes. And as you can probably note from my rather long syllabus, I give a lot of thought to the development of my classes, in particular to the readings, the topics and the readings for those classes. And I'm trying to balance things out between different best practices, between some things that are just absolutely classic studies. For instance, we'll be reading Interpreting Our Heritage, which is in its 4th edition by Freeman Tilden, who, has been deceased for quite some years, but this thing is an absolute classic. And then we'll be reading some things from the late 2000s, which obviously are more cutting edge. So why is this selection important? Why did I have you read it? What did I want you to learn from it? Why does it make a difference to us as public historians? Or more importantly, again, let's go back to our 3 rules. How can we use it to relate to our audiences as public historians? The 15 topical discussion boards. Each week, I want you to post at least, some people want to do 2 or 3, that's fine, but at least one substantive comment of 300 to 400 words. That's not very long. In your own words, about 2 of the readings. Typically, we have about 3 readings per week, so you get to pick the 2 that you want to talk about. And then I want you to pick at least 3 of those, critical thinking questions. Who, when, what not, what then. And you don't have to use the same questions for the same readings, obviously. And if you're going along and you're saying, hey, that's really interesting, I found some nice scholarly stuff, or at least reliable stuff on the internet, and someone sent me an article, or I read an article for another class, or I saw this image, or I saw this video, and if you would like to attach that to your discussion board, feel free to do that. The reason why we're using discussion board is because in a graduate seminar class like this, and particularly one that's online, we want to make certain that we're all learning from one another. And that learning from one another is an important point. So in order to promote this reflection and this learning from one another, we don't all just want to repeat one another. So the basic rule here is first come, first serve. So you need to be reading the postings as you're going along, and then you need to adjust them accordingly. So for instance, if Joe posts something first, and he's talking about something very specific, and Freeman Tilden on page 25, he says, la, 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 and his whole post is basically about page 25 of Freeman Tilden and about a couple other things. And then Mary comes along, and she was equally struck by the whole thing, and 1 hour later she posts, and she basically says, 80, 70, 80, 90% of the same thing that Joe says, then, Mary's going to have to redo her posting. So keep up with the postings. I've never had this happen really as a problem in a graduate level class. It's more likely to happen in an undergraduate class where somebody says, hey, I didn't do the reading. I'm going to look at the postings and I'm going to just rewrite somebody's posting. Never really happens in graduate school. But I need to mention it to you so that it doesn't happen and so we can all learn from one another. Now, you might get on the discussion board and find, like lots of students have over the years, that it's really maybe better to write up your posting in like Microsoft Word or a word processing document. And the reason for that is you can kind of take your time and you can think about it and you can say, well, I'm kind of tired, or I have to go to work now, or the boss has a meeting now, or whatever, or I'm no longer on lunch hour, or whatever. and I want to come back to this, so I want to close it and work on it again for a half an hour or something tonight, whatever. Doing it in a word processing program like Word allows you to go back and forth in the document to make changes. And also it helps save you from the inevitabilities of some of the technology. You know, sometimes while you're on discussion board, for some reason, you know, WNKU or Blackboard decides to kick you out, and you're in the midst of it all and you go, oh darn, I just lost everything that I've been writing for 1 hour. These are kind of fickle systems. We know that. So again, you might want to cut and paste from Word or a word processing program into your discussion board. Now note that Blackboard discussion board can't really do most of the time just the paste feature. In order to paste, you're probably going to have to hit Control V. And I talk about that in each and every posting to remind you. Please know that you are expected to read all of the assignments, even if you're only blogging about 2 of the readings. So it's easy as 0, 1, 2, 3. Let's not try to have any, you know, significant repetitions between postings, one person's posting and another. Let's have 1 posting at least per week, examining 2 of that week's reading and using at least 3 of our critical thinking questions. Now you have a week to do these. So they're always due at 11:59 p.m., 1 minute before midnight on the following Monday. For example, discussion for week number 1 will be due on the following Monday. That is week number 2 by 11:59 p.m. All of these things you can see in the discussion board itself in the link that I create for you each week. You will find the discussion boards under each week's lessons assignments. I've created the thread for each discussion board, which I call Let's Get Started. And then here's where I talk about Control V. And so you don't need to start any threads. In fact, to keep it easy so that we don't have too many threads out there and you don't have to open up a bunch of different threads and go crazy trying to read everybody's posting, I actually don't allow my students to create threads on their own. Basically, I create the thread and you click reply to it. And of course, it goes without saying that we're going to practice netiquette, that we're going to avoid foul language, trite cliches, as well as personal attacks against one another. Remember, we don't always have to agree with one another. This is a graduate class, and there are many different viewpoints. Another exercise is the book review. Each one of you should choose a book from American history. It can be a period, event, or a person. And I want to be involved in your choice, so please email me back and forth to see, you know, if you have an idea for a book, if I think it would be a good book for you to look at. And you might obviously want to tie this in with your own interest, or perhaps you have a dearth of knowledge in some particular area of American history and you want to fill that dearth up, and you might want to choose a book that way. So what is a book review? Obviously, a book review is not like a high school or, in some cases, undergraduate book report, book review. It's a thoughtful analysis. Again, it's a critical thinking exercise that you'll be using in order to take, again, a lot of information, to package that information in such a way as you can pick out the important points by thinking critically, and then you can tell me what those points are, etc. So the first thing you want to do is look at what the thesis of the book is. What's the main point of the book, the theme or thesis of the book? Good authors sometimes choose titles for the books that reflect the thesis, the thing that they're trying to say. And sometimes good authors choose titles, and editors and publishers get a hold of the titles and change them. But, you know, let's assume that most time publishers and authors try to give you a decent title, which gives you a little indication of what the book might be about before you even pick the book up. For instance, some years ago, Kenichi Omiya wrote a wonderful book called The Borderless World: Power and Strategy in the Interlinked Economy. Now, without even picking up that book, you're going to say, the borderless world. So he's not going to be talking about nations and borders. He's going to be talking about multinational corporations, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and other things that go beyond borders. So right away, you really know what his thesis is. Now, the next thing you want to look at is the thesis supported by evidence? You know, so look for the documentation, facts, statistics, etc., that are supposed to convince you and other readers of the soundness of this particular thesis. And this is really the cool thing, that as you develop in your graduate student career and as you develop as public historians, that you will learn to do. You know, you tell undergraduate students to read footnotes and bibliography and they just kind of look at you with blank stares. But for you developing your careers in public history, there's a couple things that footnotes and bibliography can do. And again, you're not reading every one, you know, word for word. You're kind of glancing at them and looking at the general overview of things, picking up how they did their research. How good of a job did they do in their research? How thorough were they? What kinds of things perhaps were not available to them? And maybe you say, boy, I am really interested. And say, for instance, you're reading a book on FDR and you say, The New Deal. And you say, wow, he really, or she, whoever the author is looking at a number of books. And I think I'm going to, you know, take one of those books out of the library or get them on my Kindle and read them because I'm really interested in learning more about the New Deal. That's what footnotes and bibliography can tell you about. And it might even give you an idea for, you know, another class project, another class paper, and you might say, hey, I think I'd like to learn more about this topic and see how I could put together a presentation. Having looked at what the author states, again, we go back to what not. What don't they state? What do they ignore, and why maybe do they ignore this? Maybe, again, it wasn't invented yet. Maybe no one talked about this yet. And then we come back to our three principal rules: audience, audience, audience. What is the intended audience of this book? Is it for the general public, the scholarly, etc.? And then I want you to find a book review, a scholarly book review out there about your book. And this is the reason for this is not only to give you another example of how book reviews are done, but also to provide you with sort of the historiography. And by historiography, I mean the background on a topic. So who are the authors that are noted in this particular field or on this particular subject or topic? What are their names? What kinds of books have they written, and what have been their themes? And then you can put the book that you've read in kind of the whole arena of what has been done in perspective. Now, you might say, how do I do a scholarly book review? Well, I have sample book reviews, 2 of them, in fact, written by yours truly and published on Blackboard. So please look those over to get a good idea of what a book review looks like. Look them over before you read your book, because once you read your book, it might be too late. So again, before you read your book, look over what we've just discussed now. Play this portion, if you want to, of the Integrity Lecture. Look over the sample book reviews, and then see the steps for completing the book review on your syllabus. And I don't want to be pedantic here. I know you all can read and read well, so we'll let you see the steps for completing the book review. The final reflective essay is something that is intentionally designed. Very oftentimes, research shows that students remember things in a class better if they can reflect upon them and if they can provide tips to the professor of what kind of worked for them and what didn't. I am intentionally not defining public history for you. You know, I could start this class and define what I think public history is. I'm intentionally not doing that so that you can read all of our selections and listen to my lectures and read the discussion boards from everyone else and, you know, decide for yourself what it means to you. And then, how has this class helped you discover what you would like to do with an MA in Public History? Obviously, some people might be heading more towards the road of museums, other people archives, some people, you know, maybe library science, etc. And it's kind of important for you to kind of reach out and see what things you can do with public history and what might be very well suited to you and to your own professional talents and abilities. And how similar or how distant were the class's learning experiences is related to your initial expectations. Now, the first thing is, with an online course like this, it's very important that we all know how to use Blackboard. I'm assuming that you do, but I'm also assuming that you need maybe a little refresher. If you go to your My Blackboard, yours is going to look slightly different as a student, but nonetheless, you're going to see a bunch of things over here on the side. Start here. announcements, the syllabus, which you can download from here, weekly lessons and assignment, instructor info, book review, samples, as you can see over here. There's also a tool here if you want to email your classmates, and it enables you to email me, email your classmates, email, you can pick out 2 or 3 of your classmates, all of your classmates, etc., depending upon what kind of questions or things that you might want to determine. So let's look at the weekly lessons assignments. And you're going to see for each of the 16 weeks, they're not all listed here because I'm still doing some. What I do, I change my classes every year, and so I'm changing things from year to year, and as I do that, I change assignments, and I also am doing different lectures. So week 1 is uploaded. So what you would do is you would go right to that and see where it's underscored, and you would, double click it twice quickly, and it would come up with some things, including what's your assignments for that week. And also, it's going to give you, in this case, the link to doing your icebreaker, the link to doing your discussion 1, and there'll be, of course, the link to this Tegrity lecture and the PowerPoint for this Tegrity lecture, which you can print out always in advance of my weekly lectures. Now, also, one thing that is very, very useful is the NKU Steely Library and all of their electronic databases. And again, you might already be familiar with how electronic databases work, but in case you're not, I want to kind of open up for you the vistas of electronic research and certainly give you a refresher course even if you already know how it works. Well, when you go into any of these electronic databases, and you'll be using your, username and password that you have here at NKU, it's going to usually require at some point in time, you to put in your username and password. And might ask you, depending upon what database you're using, to do that 2 or 3 times, depending upon what database you're going into. No big deal. So how do you get to the NKU Library webpage? Well, you go to nku.edu, and in the upper right-hand corner, you click the drop-down list, and you'll see Library Steely, just as you see here. Then, on the left-hand side, you can do a bunch of different things. They have Research Help over here, so let's click that Research Help. And then it gives you research guides. Well, you can find out about that. You can find out about copyrights and plagiarism, tutorials for how to use the library, etc. Let's go to research guides. And under research guides, you could do a bunch of things. For instance, you could click, this stuff for History World, and you'll find a number of options. You can find reference items, books and media, articles, websites. You can even find ebooks, electronic books. Here are some Credo reference ebooks. They have another thing called Humanities ebook, which can be very helpful. And there's nearly always a half-dozen ways to find what you need. For example, you could go back to the Steely Library website and click the drop-down menu for journals, A to Z. And let's say you decide to put in JSTOR. And let me introduce you to JSTOR. JSTOR stands for Journal Storage, and it is a big system where a lot of scholarly journals have gone in and given JSTOR permission to literally download, and then students can upload articles from dozens of years and so on and so forth. Some of those, if they're really recent, they might be quarantined, which means that, the journal wants you to buy a subscription annually, or it wants the library to buy a subscription annually. So it might hold the last year or 2 in quarantine, and those would only become available after a year or so. No big problem, because almost everything, not almost everything that you'll need for this class would be available in the thousands of databases and journal possibilities. So here I actually just put in JSTOR. Again, notice I didn't use capital letters. You don't have to. And lo and behold, it says, here we are. You want to test drive our new search. They have a new search. So let's take this for a test drive search. Now, let's say we were doing something on the Habsburg dynasty of Europe, that you have some exhibit that deals with, say, Austrian Americans, and you figure you need to look up the Habsburg dynasty. What I did, again, and put in small letters, Habsburg dynasty, I click these are called radio buttons, this little radio button that said only content I can access. Year of publication, I just put in 1990 because I figured, well, maybe for this particular exhibit, I don't want anything too old. Obviously, I could change that and look for older things, and then I hit apply. I was looking for research articles, but notice you can look for reviews too. So when you look for book reviews of your book, you'll want to hit this. And then I hit history, obviously, and then I click search, and lo and behold, I found 2,216 items. All of these are downloadable. In this particular case, you're doing an exhibit. You want articles, so you might ignore the things that say review. But if you were looking for a book review of your book, you know, obviously this says, okay, that's a review. Right here, if I click on something like this one that's shown in blue, it will give me a little summary, a little abstract over here, and I can read through that and decide, hey, this is something I want to look at, and if it is something I want to look at, I can click the PDF right there, and lo and behold, it will download for me completely. And the first page of the download will have something like this usually. It will tell you the source it came from, for instance, Mediterranean Studies, Volume 1, 1989, the page numbers, etc. Sometimes these digital or electronic sources won't have page numbers. That's okay too. But anyhow, as I say, how cool is that? And under the Databases tab, there's a treasure trove of digital full-text articles accessible through things like JSTOR, Academic Search Premier, Project Muse, and you can experiment with some of these yourselves in finding articles. I say for your critique essays, it could be, in this case, for your discussion boards, etc. And so, see there, you would have found, you know, JSTOR, the Scholarly Journal Archive. And if you want to see which library has a book, so let's say, you know, part of what I'm trying to teach in 601 is how do you do research? And so, while some of this may or may not apply to this particular course, it's going to be useful in your career as you get your MA in Public History. There is a really neat database called WorldCat. And it stands for World Catalog. And it has millions and millions of entries from around the world, and you can hit it to see what library has a book on a particular subject that you might need. Well, it is amazing. And let's say you find it and you say, gee, NKU library doesn't have that, my neighborhood public library doesn't have that, my neighborhood university library, whatever, doesn't have that. Well, then you can actually order it through NKU's service called SourceFinder, which is an interlibrary loan service. And it will not only, by the way, provide, try to get the book for you from another library from throughout the world. It may take a few weeks. But it will also try to get you articles that we don't have in our databases or don't have in our collections here at NKU. And so usually they'll kind of scan the article and have it sent to you electronically. Sometimes that only takes 2-3 days. Again, you're dealing with things that you don't really know here, so leave plenty of time. So let's do a WorldCat search, and let's do a WorldCat search for something that was written by yours truly, edited by yours truly, my friend and Professor Emeritus at NKU, Jim Claypool. I'm going to search for Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky, and I'm going to use the drop-down, and I'm going to choose title. Okay, and that's close enough. It's actually the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky, but Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky will get us where we want. Okay, and then I'm going to click down here, search. Well, I found 3 different results listing, and the first one says here, Paul Tenkate, James Claypool, University Press of Kentucky, 2009, libraries worldwide, 119 libraries, and notice, beep, this bleeped up, Northern Kentucky University has a copy. Well, it has actually a couple of copies. So that is interesting because it says, well, you don't have to look elsewhere. They have it right here. But let's say Northern Kentucky University, you already went there and they're out of it. You know, somebody has checked the book out. So you say, well, there are 118 other libraries that have it. And lo and behold, there's 2 more down here and 2 more down here. And you might say, well, why did these people list it differently than this one? Don't know why. some cataloger at these 4 libraries here did something a little bit different, which made the catalog accession record in WorldCat differently. So actually there's 123 libraries that have cataloged the book. And if you decided, well, I can't get the book because NKU's out of it, you could actually hit this source finder request. The first time you use it, they'll ask you to set up an account, and it'll show you how. It's very easy. And you could say in your note to them, I know NKU has this book, but you're out of it, etc. And then they'll try to get it for you. Well, our essays, our discussion boards, etc. In all good discussion boards essays, you should try to have really 3 components. And again, it might not be a full paragraph. It might be a 2-sentence kind of paragraph because it's just a discussion board. But in your introduction, you probably want to just kind of have a thesis for your discussion board. And then in a body, you want to give some examples of that or some things that you have questions about or you think other students might have questions about. And then concluding it all up and wrapping it up. And for essays and discussion board kinds of things, again, I'm using all of these terms interchangeably. Essays, discussion boards, critiques, whatever. We don't want to use vulgar language or cite encyclopedias, and try not to keep switching between verb tenses, you know, like past and present and past perfect and so forth. It's not considered professional. I think you all know about plagiarism, but I'm required always to let you know what plagiarism is. Plagiarism includes quoting or using wording from a book, journal article, internet, or other source word for word without putting the quote in quotation marks and citing it in a footnote. Paraphrasing another person's unique ideas, using another person's tables, graphs, photographs, artwork, illustrations without giving them credit. This is going to be very important when you do PowerPoints into the public and when you go ahead and put things on internet sites for your museums. This is going to be very important when you put together exhibits. You do not want to use photographs without citing where they're from. And usually you have to have permission. We'll talk a little bit about that more. It depends upon whether it was before the early 1920s or not, whether copyright has been applied for since then, etc. Obviously, you don't want to use a whole other student's paper or presentation, even if that student approves and gives it to you. You don't want to buy one or get one off of a website or service. Now, avoiding plagiarism is really easy as long as you know some basic rules. Sometimes you're writing something and you just say to yourself, wow, I could not write that better myself. That historian, that author just, completely summarized it and I couldn't come up with any better way to do it. In which case you just want to go ahead and if you're doing it word for word, just put it in quotation marks and go ahead and footnote it, as we've done here. That's for verbatim or word-for-word quotes. And, if you ever see ellipses, ... that means, hey, there was more to that sentence, there was more there, I just decided not to include it all, it's not appropriate, say, to your particular discussion. Now, if you would use something that's just really, really long, like this whole entire paragraph, you would have to use what we call block quotations. Different professors do different things, but usually block quotations are single-spaced like this, and they're usually indented on both the left and the right-hand sides. And the reason why this is this tells the reader, wow, this is all one big quote. It also gets around, the general professorial thing of like, oh God, you have to have 300 or 400 words for this essay or whatever, and you decide to take 250 of those words and have them quote it. That would be a bad idea. So this is what that shows if you've got a really, really long quote. Sometimes, even though you're not quoting, say, this information word for word, how many people walking down the street or how many people who are, say, even Asian scholars, and, I teach history of China and history of Japan here and have done postdoctoral work in Japan. I don't walk down the street knowing this kind of information, that Asia's population increased in China. It increased from 143 million in 1741 to 400 million in the 1840s. I don't have an eidetic memory like, Sheldon in the Big Bang Theory. And this is the kind of thing that I would want to quote so you would know where I got the information from. This is showing you what a footnote looks like, and this is showing you an in-text footnote. Now, so you don't get obsessive compulsive about this, know that you don't need to give a footnote for widely known, generally known, widely disseminated information like these 4 things. Christopher Columbus sailed to America in 1492. U.S. entered World War II after the Japanese bombing. Those are things most people know. If you would use a graph or a photograph or an illustration, you would need to give the source, something like this. Always you need to do that for even if you have permission, for your exhibits, etc. This is an example of a footnote. A footnote occurs at the foot of a page. Endnotes are the same thing, except they occur in a separate piece of paper or at the end of a paper or an essay. These show you sample footnotes, how the first line is indented, and etc. And then these show you how to do a footnote for a book, and this is according to the Chicago style of citation, and that is what we use in history, so you probably should get used to it. This shows you a book with multiple editors. Notice how I've taken everything and shown you where to put it and what gets italicized. We don't use underlines anymore. We use italics. What gets put in parentheses, where commas go, where periods go. All of these are very important, and these are the kinds of things that you need to be obsessive about when you do footnotes and bibliography, that you have it in the correct Chicago footnote form. A dissertation, I show you how to do that. How to do a scholarly article, how to do a popular magazine, how to do a newspaper article, how to do a website even, how to do a book review. So you're going to have a book review to do, and you need to find a book review of that book, so this is how you do book reviews. And it needs to be in this format because, again, we're doing Chicago style in public history. A manuscript, an interview by you. And a bibliography, of course, is listing everything alphabetical by the author's first and last names. Obviously, some bibliographies separate things out into books, articles, manuscripts, etc. And then within those separate sections, you would do things alphabetically. Notice how in a bibliography, instead of indenting the first line, in the Chicago style, we indent the second line and thereafter. And it all does become alphabetical by author's last name. So you see Jane Doe would come before John Doe because Doe and Doe are the same names, but Jane comes alphabetically before John. Now John Doe is actually written 2 things, and because one of them starts with an M, that comes before the one that starts with a T. And then notice this one doesn't have an author because it's a website, but you notice it comes next because it is P, and Paul doesn't know how to put things in order because this should have been next because this is M, and then this is P, and then this is P. Don't know how that happened. It must be some kind of bug in my program, or maybe it's just because I was doing it late at night. All right, the bibliographic citation, book, indent, that's how you do a bibliography for a book with multiple authors, a dissertation, an article, a website, a book review, a manuscript, interviews by you. When in doubt, ask me. A great reference is the Chicago Manual of Style, preferred by historians. And sometimes even the Chicago Manual doesn't have what you need. And in that case, you need to remember two important rules: be thorough and be consistent. I would suggest not using .com, solely internet sources that generally are not scholarly. Again, things, could be from disrespectable sources, controversial sources. When in doubt, please consult with the professor. Acceptable sources, NKU library databases, other academic and public library databases, scholarly journals, government documents and government websites, respectable newspapers and magazines, and many .org and .net sites, but again, you have to be careful. So that's all for this week, and I look forward to teaching you over the next 15 weeks. If you have any questions, please contact me. Have a good day.